The auditorium buzzed like a live wire, every seat filled, every camera pointed. The lights burned hot, casting a stage where reputations could rise or be shattered in seconds. At the center, Alan Dershowitz leaned into the microphone, his smirk sharp as a blade. He delivered his question with the speed of a practiced trap, a gotcha, wrapped in legalese, the kind of maneuver that had humbled opponents for decades. The crowd chuckled, sensing a takedown before it even happened. To them, the outcome was already written. The professor would school the Congresswoman. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She tilted her head, inhaled slowly, and let silence linger, long enough for anticipation to swell. Her calm wasn't hesitation. It was power, coiled and waiting. Then, with a voice steady and deliberate, she delivered a single line. No shouting, no stumble, just precision. The laughter evaporated. The smirk on Dershowitz's face faltered. The trap reversed. In that instant, the professor wasn't leading the exchange. He was reeling from it. And the crowd, moment ago certain of the outcome, now leaned forward in stunned disbelief. No one expected a freshman congresswoman to turn the professor into the student. The tension wasn't just about two people on a stage. It was about what they represented. On one side stood Alan Dershowitz, the Ivy League icon, a celebrity lawyer who had defended presidents, sparred on television, and built his brand on the sharpness of his wit. He thrived on spectacle, skilled at flipping arguments, so quickly his opponents often looked foolish before they even realized what happened. For decades, he'd walked into rooms assuming he'd be the smartest man there, and more often than not, he was. Across from him stood Jasmine Crockett, new to Congress, younger, and already underestimated by critics who whispered she was too green to hold her own. But Crockett's background wasn't one of privilege or ivory towers. It was the courtroom. She was trained in discipline, precision, and the kind of patience that wins when the stakes are life and freedom. She didn't need spectacle. She needed only facts, timing, and a steady hand. The audience saw a mismatch, a legal titan versus a rookie politician. But beneath the surface, the stakes ran deeper. This wasn't just a debate. It was a fight for credibility, for who controlled the narrative, for who got to speak with authority in America's future. Every interruption, every smirk, every dismissive chuckle carried weight. Because in that moment, the clash wasn't merely words. It was identity colliding with entitlement. And as the back and forth grew sharper, one truth became undeniable. In this battle, interruption wasn't power, it was desperation. To understand the weight of that moment on stage, you have to understand Alan Dershowitz. For decades, his name was practically synonymous with Harvard Law. The youngest full professor in the school's history, he wasn't just a lawyer, he was an institution. His lectures drew standing-room-only crowds, his courtroom defenses landed on front pages, and his writings shaped debates in law schools and newsrooms alike. He became the man who could break down the Constitution on a Monday morning, and then spar with television hosts by evening. But Dershowitz's fame wasn't built solely on academia. It was forged in the fire of celebrity trials. O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Jeffrey Epstein. His client list read like a mix of American icons and tabloid villains. Each case fed the public imagination and tightened his grip on the spotlight. To some, he was a brilliant defender of the rule of law, the embodiment of due process. To others, he was the ultimate hired gun, always ready to twist technicalities and charm cameras while shielding the powerful. As the years went on, Dershowitz drifted further into the political storm. Cable news made him a regular face, a pundit who thrived on confrontation. He became a figure you couldn't ignore. Praised for his sharp mind, loathed for his willingness to stand beside the controversial and the disgraced. His legacy began to fracture. No longer the untouchable professor, he became something else, a combatant in the theater of American politics, feeding on division, spotlight, and the roared debate. His tactics were unmistakable. He filibustered with intellect, drowning opponents in torrents of precedent and theory until they looked overwhelmed. He cornered with technicalities, wielding the fine print of the law like a trap waiting to spring. And when all else failed, he mocked, with that brand of Scully sarcasm that made him seem like the clever teacher and his opponent the clueless student. On stage, Dershowitz projected authority with ease. He leaned into microphones like they were gavels, spoke as if every syllable carried centuries of legal weight. He didn't just answer questions. He occupied the space, making others feel small, like their arguments were distractions from his brilliance. That was the Dershowitz effect. Opponents didn't just lose ground, they lost stature. But beneath the performance, something had shifted. His brilliance was undeniable, but brilliance wielded endlessly for ego, for winning the argument instead of illuminating the truth, carries a cost. His sharpest weapon, his intellect, had become a blade he swung not for justice but for dominance. And blades, when used this way, always dull. That night on stage, in front of cameras and a restless crowd, Dershowitz wasn't just defending a point. He was defending his image, his reputation, his identity as the man who never lost control of the room. But the flaw in his strategy was already visible. Because against someone who wasn't playing his game, someone steady, unshaken, and unwilling to be reduced to a foil, his tactics risked exposing what they really were. For all his intellect, all his experience, all his decades of mastery, Dershowitz had one vulnerability. When the spectacle became more important than the substance, he mistook volume for victory. And on that night, he was about to learn, even the sharpest sword dulls when wielded for ego, not truth. Jasmine Crockett's story begins in places where voices like hers were expected to be quiet. Growing up as a young black woman in America meant hearing, over and over again, the unspoken rule. Your place is at the margins, not at the center. Power was rarely reflected back at her. Authority was almost never embodied by women who looked like her. And when girls of color dared to speak boldly, the world often labeled it anger instead of truth. But Crockett refused the script she was handed. She carried herself with a kind of quiet defiance, the knowledge that silence was not safety but erasure. If the world wanted her to shrink, she would expand. If they expected her to sit still, she would stand taller. Her resilience was not born in comfort, but in resistance. Every room that underestimated her only sharpened her edge. That fire carried her into law. There, she honed discipline not in shouting matches, but in surgical precision. A courtroom is not won by noise. It is won by evidence, composure, and the ability to dismantle an opponent's case piece by piece. Crockett learned patience under fire. How to keep her voice steady while others grew frantic. How to let the weight of silence work in her favor. How to make every word land like a gavel. Her legal career forged in her an armor, calm not as passivity, but as control. Where others mistook stillness for weakness, Crockett wielded it as strategy. She learned that true power wasn't in raising your volume, but in forcing others to exhaust theirs. She wasn't fragile. She was disciplined. She was exacting. And above all, she was unshakable. That same discipline guided her rise into Congress. Suddenly, the same young woman once told to stay quiet was standing on the nation's stage, speaking for those who had been ignored for generations. Her sharp wit made her stand out. Her ability to dissect arguments with both humor and precision made her feared by adversaries and cherished by allies. She became not just a representative, but a voice, a defender for the unheard, a challenger to those who confused arrogance for authority. Her journey had always been about transformation. From the child told to stay in her place to the Congresswoman carving out space for others, Crockett embodied the story of resilience turned into leadership. Every sneer she endured, every dismissal she absorbed, became fuel for a voice that refused to break. And that night, standing across from Candace Owens, her training was tested in its purest form. She knew what Owens thrived on. She knew the game, the loud interruptions, the mocking laughter, the attempt to rattle her into a reactive outburst that could be clipped, packaged, and turned into spectacle. But Crockett did not take the bait. She didn't need to, because her calm was not born in that moment. It was born in a lifetime of learning to hold steady, while others tried to silence her. What Owens mistook for fragility was in fact practiced strength. Her stillness that night was not the absence of power. It was power refined. It was the composure of a woman who had fought her way into every room she entered, and who knew the force of measured words. And on that stage, Her poise became her sharpest weapon. The air inside the auditorium was already charged, but when the exchange reignited, sparks flew. Dershowitz leaned forward, his tone sharpened, ready to dominate with sheer force of volume. He cut in once, not even letting Crockett finish her sentence. The audience erupted into a mix of cheers and groans, a living echo chamber amplifying his arrogance. Twice, he interrupted again, louder this time, latching onto a single phrase she uttered, twisting it, trying to make her stumble. Yet Crockett didn't stumble. She inhaled, lips pressed in quiet discipline, waiting. 3 times. His interruptions grew shorter, sharper, like jabs meant to unbalance. A section of the crowd laughed nervously. Another jeered. But Crockett remained steady, almost statuesque. She wasn't fighting for airtime. She was claiming authority through restraint. The moderator tried to step in, raising a hand, attempting to restore decorum. But Dershowitz, buoyed by the noise of his supporters, bulldozed past the gavel, past the plea for order. 4, 5. Each cutoff was more desperate than the last, as though volume could substitute for substance. The narrator's rhythm tightened. 1, 2, 3, 5 interruptions. By now, the tension was unbearable. Dershowitz leaned in so close his voice carried not just over a microphone, but across Crockett's composure. His words pressed for dominance, each syllable a demand for surrender. He expected her to crack, to match his fury, to lose herself in the theater of aggression. But Crockett didn't. She didn't speed up, didn't talk over him, didn't retreat. Instead, she allowed the storm to rage. She let the interruptions pile up, their weight collapsing under their own noise. The audience sensed it too, his control slipping, her silence becoming sharper than any rebuttal. And then it happened, on the 6th attempt, when his voice pitched higher, his hand slapping the podium for emphasis. Crockett finally moved. She lifted her hand, slowly, deliberately, as if commanding not just him but the entire room. The crowd hushed. Even the moderator paused mid-breath. And in that sudden stillness, every eye turned to her. On the 6th attempt, Crockett finally raised her hand, and the room fell still. For a moment, silence gripped the hall. Crockett's raised hand had done what the moderator, the rules, and reason could not. It commanded order. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, deliberate, not rushed by the storm that had just passed. "Professor," she began, not a tremor in her tone, "I let you interrupt me 5 times. And each time, you showed America something you didn't mean to. Interruption isn't power. It's fear." The audience gasped. A wave of murmurs rippled across the room, the kind that signaled everyone knew they were witnessing a shift. Dershowitz, who had thrived on making others look small, suddenly looked diminished. His interruption, his weapon, had been reframed as weakness. Crockett pressed on, each word sharpened like a scalpel slicing through pretense. "You asked your question as if you were testing a student. But here's the truth. This isn't a classroom, and I'm not here to be lectured. I was sent here by the people, and I serve them, not your ego." Applause broke out, sharp at first, then swelling into a chorus. Dershowitz leaned back, blinking rapidly, his smirk flickering as though unsure whether to return or retreat. Crockett didn't let the energy fade. She turned slightly toward the audience, speaking not just to him, but to every ear in the room, every eye watching at home. This isn't about who can twist words the fastest or who can interrupt the loudest. This is about democracy. This is about service. This is about whether truth can still cut through arrogance. She paused, timing the silence perfectly. Cameras zoomed in, the lights catching her face, illuminating not just composure but conviction. And when you talk over people, when you try to drown them out, what you reveal is not your strength. It's your fear of what they might say. Because the truth doesn't need to shout. The truth stands. The crowd erupted. Cheers, claps, whistles. The kind of response that no prepared line, no clever trap could manufacture. It was raw, uncontainable, and undeniable. Dershowitz tried to regain footing. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, leaned toward the mic. Well, with all due respect. But the respect was gone. The dominance, the aura of control he carried into the hall, had evaporated in a single stroke. His words stumbled into the noise of applause, swallowed before they even landed. Crockett didn't flinch. She looked at him, calm, unbothered, almost serene. The visual contrast was striking. The elder professor, flushed and restless, versus the freshman congresswoman, centered and immovable. Even those who had cheered his interruption sat quieter now, their arms crossed, their eyes fixed not on him but on her. For the first time that night, Dershowitz looked small, shrinking under the weight of a truth he couldn't out-argue. Crockett leaned into the mic once more, her voice softened but no less firm. You can try to outwit, you can try to out-talk, but you cannot outlast the truth. And tonight, the truth is standing right here. The hall exploded again, applause so loud it seemed to rattle the rafters. Hashtags were already forming in the minds of those watching, tweets already half-written, clips already destined for virality. Dershowitz opened his mouth, but what could he say? The momentum was gone, the smirk erased, the performance unraveling. Every interruption, every attempted jab had been flipped against him, exposed not as mastery, but as insecurity. The narration lingered with cinematic weight. By morning, Dershowitz's smirk was gone, but Crockett's words were everywhere. By dawn, the internet had done its work. Hashtags lit up feeds. Hashtag Crockett Clapback. Hashtag Dershowitz defeated. The clip looped endlessly on TikTok, edited into slow-motion replays, reaction memes, and side-by-side breakdowns. On Twitter, journalists called it a masterclass in composure, while commentators marveled at how a freshman congresswoman had unraveled a legal titan without raising her voice. Dershowitz became a punchline. His once commanding smirk turned into a meme template. Crockett, meanwhile, was celebrated as a new kind of political force. Her calm now branded as courage, her poise elevated to legend. In the stillness after her reply, something larger than a debate moment began to take shape. Crockett's words weren't just an answer to Alan Dershowitz. They were a rebuke to a culture that too often mistakes arrogance for intellect and noise for leadership. Her calm became a mirror, reflecting what America desperately needs but rarely sees on public stages. Dignity over arrogance, service over ego, truth over theater. It was no accident that the moment hit so deeply. For decades, public discourse has been ruled by those who shout the loudest, who drown out nuance with volume. Dershowitz embodied that tradition. The intellectual showman, the courtroom brawler, the professor who could wield rhetoric like a sword. But Crockett's quiet precision cut sharper than any blade. America, watching from living rooms and phone screens, saw a different model of power emerge. A leader who didn't need to shout to be heard, who didn't need to interrupt to prevail. And for women of color, this moment rang with particular resonance. Too often, their silence is misread as weakness, their composure mistaken for passivity. Crockett shattered that perception in real time. By refusing to match Dershowitz's noise, she revealed that composure is not submission, it is strength. She demonstrated that restraint can be revolutionary, that holding your ground without raising your voice can shake an empire or bluster. Her answer distilled into a timeless truth. The measure of a leader isn't who interrupts, but who endures interruption without losing their truth. That single line, echoed across platforms, became more than a clapback. It became a creed for anyone who has ever been talked over, belittled, or underestimated. Because the truth is, we all face Dershowitz types in our own lives. The boss who takes credit for your ideas. The classmate who mocks rather than listens. The relative who believes volume is the same as being right. These figures loom large in our daily battles, loud, arrogant, dismissive. And like Dershowitz, they thrive on chaos, hoping their noise will drown out your clarity. Crockett showed us another way. You don't need to outshout them. You need only to hold steady, to let your truth stand untouched while there's collapses under its own weight. This is why the clip went viral, why hashtags erupted, why commentators called it historic. People weren't just watching a debate. They were watching a parable unfold in real time. They saw the archetype of arrogance falter before the archetype of dignity. They saw themselves in Crockett, the underestimated, the talked over, the dismissed, and they saw hope in how she stood her ground. And this moment carried a lesson far beyond politics. In every field, from boardrooms to classrooms to living rooms, dignity outlasts noise. Service outshines ego. Clarity cuts through chaos. Crockett's poise reminded America that true leadership isn't about commanding attention. It's about commanding respect. It's about knowing that the people who matter will remember not who shouted the loudest, but who spoke the clearest truth. By the time the stage lights dimmed, the lesson was undeniable. Arrogance may win a headline, but dignity wins history. And Crockett had just written her name into that history. The crescendo was unmistakable. Dignity outlasts noise. In the end, Dershowitz's tricks crumbled against Crockett's poise. His interruptions, his sarcasm, his smirk, none could withstand the weight of her steady truth. Her calm reply went viral instantly, not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. That moment proved what history keeps teaching us. Arrogance burns out, but dignity endures. And Crockett's dignity lit a path millions could see. If you believe dignity always outlasts arrogance, subscribe and join us. Together, we tell the stories America cannot ignore, and the ones arrogance cannot silence.